Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I'd like to continue with my new updates on the EB-5 program and various items which have been either through regulation, through case law, or through simply adjudication of many of the EB-5s have evolved through the process so that some of these issues will become clearer and some may become the opposite. But either way, we'll move on from there. Now, this particular video, I'd like to talk about the I-526 stage, and that is the initial stage upon which you need to file for the EB-5. And within that, I'd like this video to concentrate on a couple issues. One is the source of funds, and two are the TEAs. And I'll explain what all that is momentarily, but let's start with the source of funds. Now, the source of funds is really what it says. You're going to be investing, let's say, $1 million in your own business or $500,000 in either a regional center or a TEA. A TEA is a targeted employment area. And the immigration, the law, needs to make sure that all of these funds that you are receiving are legal, were obtained legally. Okay, so if I were to exaggerate a little bit, if it's mob money, if it's drug money, if it's because you stole it from a jewelry store, or you stole it from somebody, obviously the EB-5 isn't going to work for you. Okay, and so the source of the funds needs to go through a couple different levels. Some people think that if you can't trace the source of funds, just get a letter from your dad saying he gave it to you, and then boom, you've complied with the requirement of the source of funds because you have a letter from your father saying he gave you $500,000. That is not going to work. Okay, the letter by itself is fine. If it's a gift, that's fine. But then what happens? Then you have to say, okay, Dad, now I need to get proof of where you got the $500,000. So if it's from business, then you're going to need to show business records. You're going to have to show bank accounts. You're going to have to show deposits. There's all kinds of things that you have to show in order to prove the source of funds. And that's a big issue. I don't want to minimize the amount of time that needs to be taken in order to properly do a source of funds analysis, because if you don't, you're going to get an RFE, which is a request for evidence, saying you did not show us where exactly this money came from. Please show us, and they'll give you a time to do it, and if you don't, the case will be denied. So you may as well take care of it at the beginning and do the proper analysis at the beginning to avoid the issue later on. So there are some countries that do not have a real enforceable tax code, okay? Or they may have an enforceable tax code, but when people don't abide by it, it's not enforceable. Like, for example, if you're from Brazil, there's a lot of very wealthy people who don't want to pay all the taxes because apparently there's lots of, and this is with a lot of countries, there's lots of corruption and not much in return for it. So, they may put a lot of their money in offshore accounts, and then the taxes don't get filed, and then there's not documentary proof of where the money came from, except that you have a offshore account with a bunch of money in it. So there's some issues in regards to how that can be proven. It becomes more difficult. It can still be proven, but if in fact the offshore account or where the money is difficult to source, it does make the EB-5 more difficult to prepare, but it's not a roadblock completely, for sure. However, in the EB-5, in the cover letter and the attorney cover letter and in the documentation, it should make it crystal clear where the money came from. Now, in addition to the source of funds, the next part of the analysis is called the path of funds. Okay, so let's say you've sufficiently developed, analyzed, and submitted evidence on the source of funds. Well, then the path of funds becomes the next important thing, and you have to show how the money got from wherever it was to the U.S. for the investment. Okay, um, and sometimes that's harder than it sounds. Like for example, there are countries that have restrictions on the amount of money that can be sent out at one time. So, for example, China, you can only send out $50,000 at a time to any particular person. So how do they get around it? Well, they send $50,000 to the investor's wife, to the investor's, uh, you know, three sons. They send it to from several different places. Now, of course, this makes the analysis a bit more difficult, but the U.S. doesn't really care what the Chinese law is on that. All they know is that there is a prohibition on sending more than $50,000 out at a time, and they will accept. If you have 10 of your family members each send out $50,000, totaling $500,000, and you can show the path of where all of that came from. Likewise, there are countries that have restrictions on investing in the U.S. It's not necessarily that they stop a certain amount from leaving the country, but there are issues with the amounts coming into the U.S., like with Iran and so forth. Countries such as that have to go through a designated U.S. agency, which you as the attorney, if you have an attorney who really knows what they're doing, they have to go through the designated agency. They have to get an exemption of this particular requirement, and of course show why it's coming, where it's coming, what it's for. Obviously the fear is that from a lot of these countries, if a bunch of money comes in, it's to fund terrorist activities or illegal activities or purchase illegal products, whatever it is. So if it can be clearly documented, you have to add that to the process to get an exemption if you come from one of those countries that does have import restrictions into the United States. So in regards to that, that would be the source of funds and the path of funds. Now, what about the TEA? Okay, so why even listen to this section of the video? Why worry about a TEA? Well, I'll tell you why. Assuming you're not going to invest in a regional center, and even if you do, the regional centers have basically got approved inside of TEAs, but let's say you're more concerned about opening your own business, and you really have two choices. You invest $1 million and open your own business with $1 million, or you get your business inside a TEA, a targeted employment area, and you invest only $500,000. So why listen to this part? Because it might save $500,000. And for most people, unless you don't care about saving $500,000, will be interested to know about the TEAs. Now, you can look on several governmental websites and you can see large TEAs, that have, basically the way it works is a TEA is either a rural area, which has, it's outside of a metropolitan statistical area. So, basically you look at the big areas like LA, Chicago, whatever, and that's an MSA. So it doesn't matter if, you know of a town right near a large city that has only 20,000 people in it, and has cows and horses walking around, has to be outside the MSA in order to be considered rural, okay? I'm not really talking to that degree here, because most of the time you're not going to want to really start a business in a rural area, because you're obviously starting a business to make money and to be in business, and if you're just going to do this for EB-5 purposes and ultimately end up going out of business, especially before the IA-29 gets adjudicated, then you will not be serving anybody. You won't do the job creation, and that's another thing. You get a job in you get a business in a rural area, the job creation requirements can be a lot more difficult. So what I'm talking about is the other part of what is consisting of a TEA, and that is where you can show 150% unemployment of the national average. Okay, And so there are big TEAs around that you might want to go into, but the reality is that the majority of people don't want to look for a big TEA in the middle of where they think is nowhere, or somewhere they wouldn't want to be and relocate. They have in their minds where they want to go. They have in their minds what they'd like to do. And the question would be whether or not they can get a TEA. So how is it that you might be able to get a TEA if, in fact, it's not already in one of the larger designated TEAs already? Well, depending what state you are from, the procedure differs a bit, but you can actually, let's say you look where you want to start the business, okay? And let's say it's a census tract. And you can actually put one or two or three census tracts together. And if you know anything about real estate, that's a very small portion. I mean, we're talking maybe less than a block or 2 blocks or whatever it is. And you can do your analysis and then write the particular state that will issue a letter on whether or they can issue a letter saying yes, this is a TEA. So you basically do your analysis, find the place that you want, get the specific tracks, get an economist and real estate person, so forth, to at least initially show that the employment in that particular small area is 150% above the national average, which you might be able to go 5 blocks any direction, which there's totally normal employment, but in that little area, it's going to be a lot easier to show that it's above the average because that little area, maybe there's nobody particularly employed in that little area, or maybe there's just 1 store or 2 stores or whatever it is. So that is the way that you can get a TEA virtually, and I'm not saying anywhere, but in a much more respected space that you're looking for, rather than in a pre-designated TEA in the middle of North Dakota. No disrespect to North Dakota, but somewhere a lot of people may not want to go to. And you can even get TEAs in what appears to be completely high employment or normal employment areas. Now, another thing with the TEA is it will only last for a certain period of time. Okay, and you have to make sure that the I-526 is filed within that particular time. Okay, now there's a couple things you have to worry about. If the TEA is going to expire, and you file the I-526 before it expires, and it's assuming the money is actually in the investment before you file the 526, then the time that you need to show it falls within a TEA is met, even if it expires thereafter. But there's an exception to that. A lot of times people will put their money in escrow in order to make sure the 526 gets approved, or they'll file the 526 before it gets out of escrow, and the issue then is that the time of filing does not apply as to when the TEA is applicable. It is when the money gets out of escrow. Okay, so 2 different timelines that you have to be aware of, depending if the money is either directly in the investment or in escrow. Again, if it is in escrow, then only when it gets out of escrow will it be determined if it's a TEA. So if the TEA is going to expire in 30 days and you get out of escrow in 45 days, you're out of luck. But if it's already out of escrow by the time you file and the TEA expires 3 days after, it's fine. Okay, so that's how the TEA works. So we've gone over the TEAs, we've gone over the source of funds, the path of funds. Hopefully that'll help. If you like the video, click like, subscribe, and also you can send me questions to get a consultation. Okay, more on the coming videos.